Okay, so we're going to be looking at some of the fibers, jumping into this fiber conversation with John Ramsey. And so, specifically, like the black fibers of his shirt and trying to really dig into that a little bit more. And so, kind of looking at the initial discovery of Dr. John Meyer during the examination of JonBenét's body, he said that he personally observed numerous traces of a dark fiber in her area and the big areas of JonBenet. And so you have Detective Linda Arndt, who was present and witnessed this observation. And so JonBenet was found wearing these bloomies with the printed rosebuds and the word Wednesday on the elastic waistband. And so the underpants were stained with urine, and the inner aspect of JonBenét's sort of lower body there, there were several, I think, red areas of staining. I think measuring about a half an inch in maximum dimension, I think the autopsy said. And so while the initial autopsy report mentions red stains consistent with blood, in a separate search warrant, you have, I think, Dr. Meyer saying that he saw or observed numerous traces of a dark fiber in this same area, right? And so we have, first off, we have blood. We have blood in this area, and we also have these dark fibers. Now, we did mention that Linda Arndt thought it was human fluids in terms of coming from a male. But I think the autopsy report, because they put the black light on it, and so the autopsy report said something different. And I think Dr. Meyer said it was probably blood. And so thinking about fibers and hair from the clothing and the body surfaces, fibers and hair from the clothing and the body surfaces were among the items turned over to the Boulder Police Department as evidence. And so the CBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigations, collected hair fibers and fiber control cuttings from various exhibits, as we talked about before. Though the specific types of fibers, for example, like black fibers and stuff like that, those are not detailed for all collections. They just said we collected fibers from these things. I think they had hair and fibers from the cellar, hair and fibers from the pillow were among items described in the submission reports for forensic analysis. And then you had the cutting from JonBenét's underpants, or undergarments, I'll call them those. The cutting, and the specific little cutting from her underpants was submitted for DNA analysis. And so the cutting from there was reportedly packaged with the extract material. So Bode Technology, which was a lab involved in the retesting, I think somebody else did it first, specifically requested the cutting from this sort of area on JonBenét's underpants and noted that it was not included with the underwear itself. So initially, but later confirmed its location. And so Patsy Ramsey was aware that the bloomies of JonBenet that she was wearing belonged to, and she confirmed that these bloomies belonged to JonBenet. So moving forward with this kind of idea of the discussion, and use maybe some of the disputes, mostly coming from John. Well, I won't say that. I'll say John and Linwood regarding the fibers. So during an interview with John and Patsy Ramsey and their attorneys, or during interviews with John and Patsy and their attorneys, there were significant discussions and disputes concerning fiber evidence. And in particular, we're going to talk about Patsy, but at this moment, I want to talk about John. John Ramsey's black shirt and the fibers found on JonBenet, right? So in August of 2000, on an interview, Bruce Levin stated that based on forensic evidence, hairs that are associated, that the source is the collared black shirt. I want you to hear me. It's the collared black shirt that John Ramsey sent us he says, that are found in your daughter's underpants, were found in JonBenet's underpants. So he said it's because John gave 2 shirts. We're going to talk about that. He further clarified that these were black fibers that match one of the 2 shirts that was provided to us by the Ramseys. It was a black shirt, and they were located in the underpants of JonBenet and found in that area. And as we've said before, maybe you haven't heard me say it, but John responds quickly with, "That's BS." He said, "I don't believe that. That's ridiculous." And then Lynn Wood strongly objects to these questions without full disclosure of the forensic reports, sort of arguing that it's totally unfair or totally inappropriate, and an attempt to unfairly cast, perhaps in someone's mind that reads these interviews, that this finger of blame would be placed on John and Patsy. And you notice that we talked about before in discussions about these chronic allegations made against John and Patsy, where the question was never fully answered, right? The question was never fully answered. And when they are asked about it, when somebody asks them about it, they get mad, they get up in arms, and they don't want to talk to you anymore. And they do this. Bruce Levin wasn't done with the question. And John cut him off, said, "That's BS. I don't believe it." I don't care what you believe. That's not the way this works. You can't just say, "I don't believe it." I don't care. I asked you for evidence. This is consistent, right? Because when we ask you for the notepad, and you give it to us and we find evidence that maybe one of you guys did this. Maybe one of you guys wrote this. And we find evidence of that. Or we find, not evidence, right? But we find a suggestive trail, right? We make an observation that it's possible that you guys had something to do with this. I do understand where you come from when you say, "Oh, no, it had nothing to do with me." Yeah, but I'm telling you guys, the more you look at this thing, I don't know about this intruder theory. I really don't. Because there have to be so many things have to be in place for this. Excuse me. So many things have to be in place for the intruder to make sense, right? For an intruder theory. On the surface, yes, you could come up with some sort of intruder theory narrative. But the more you look at everything that the intruder is said to have done, it becomes sort of like a laughingstock. Like, are you serious? You seriously expect me to believe? My God, the intruder had to be some sort of wizard, because there's no way. Anyways, Mr. Wood demanded to see the actual lab reports, stating that verbal characterizations could be misleading, take that word, could be misleading, and that fiber evidence is subject. Now, Lynn Wood, I will tell you, is very careful, and we need to pay attention to his wording. He's, as a lawyer at the time, he's very careful with his wording. He says, verbal characterizations could be misleading, and that fiber evidence is subject to a great amount of debate in the profession. Right. So this is, as a lawyer, this is what you're supposed to be doing. You are supposed to be, and this is the basis when we think about Hal Haddon and Haddon, Morgan, and Foreman and their strategy. This is the primary basis of their strategy, or one of the pillars of their strategy, and that is to sort of impeach the witness, right? And what that means is you sort of discredit The point is to discredit the witness. And so what Lynn Wood is doing is kind of following that path and saying, you know, that this kind of evidence is subject to a great amount of debate. So he's not saying that it's not true, but he's saying that there are debates, and he's just trying to establish a foundation for debating the truthfulness or the validity of, you know, this forensic path that is being used. And so he suggested that if the fibers were merely consistent with or similar to and not a conclusive match, it should be stated clearly, and that other fibers related or fibers unrelated to Ramsey's were also found. And so he's at this point detracting and saying, oh, you know, other fibers other than what the Ramseys did were found. And if this is not a conclusive match, you should state that clearly. And so Levin and Kane, the prosecution, Levin and Kane, maintained that the fibers were identical in all scientific respects, but admitted that there is something unique about it that could only come from, they admitted that there's something unique about it that could only come from a particular item. If you're asking us that, if you're asking us that if there's something unique about this that can only come from this one black collared shirt, then the answer is no, regarding conclusiveness. And so they were reluctant to release the full reports as it was an ongoing investigation. And so what they're saying is, in terms of the black fibers that we found, it just so happens to be the case that John's fibers from one of the shirts, not both of the shirts, one of the shirts matches. And so, you know, my specific question in response, or sort of my observation in response to this information, sort of might center around how they went about testing for a unique identity. How are we testing? How are we trying to get to the uniqueness of this? And these are just like first initial thoughts reading through the information, and not necessarily looking at anything, but sort of trying to just say, okay, these are my next follow-up questions. And in order to say that the shirts that John gave them were a match, what did we do? And so I also think that while prosecutors had to concede that it could have been some other shirt, I think it's also important to follow up on the fact that one of these shirts were of the consistency necessary for this case. And I think that's important. At least one of the shirts, John gave two, but at least one of the shirts were necessary. The consistency of that shirt, the texture of that shirt that consistency was applicable in this case. And so while you may have similar fibers used in other cases, and those might be a match, you know, when you're trying to test and match up the DNA and stuff like, or the forensics, when you're trying to test and match that up, I think it's important to center in on the crime scene, right? Because what Lynn Wood is trying to do is take us outside of the crime scene and say, well, you know, just because you use white paint on this wall and you found white paint, you know, on the crime scene doesn't mean that white paint can't be found anywhere else. Correct. I understand that. But specific to the crime scene, when we're looking at the crime scene, we're probably looking for things closest to the crime scene. We're not looking for things in South Dakota. We're looking for things right here in Boulder, Colorado. So if I'm making an example, I might say that we know that Patsy's coat or Patsy's paint tray, with the paint that she had, probably wasn't the only paint tray made, nor was the coat a one of one, right? We know that. This is not the only paint tray. This is not the only coat that that exists, you know, that Patsy has. There's other coats. However, no other coat, to the counter argument, no other coat was found at the crime scene. And you have to find somebody who has a black shirt similar. We're talking about the intruder now, who has a black shirt similar to John Ramsey in this case, but also has a coat similar to Patsy. And so this intruder, what we're saying is if we're believing in the intruder theory, the idea is that the intruder had a black collared shirt like John Ramsey and was wearing it at the time of the crime. The intruder now has a coat like Patsy and was wearing it at the time of the crime when they made, the stuff. And it's funny because the intruder was doing very John-like things at the time. He was doing very John-like things and very Patsy-like things. Whoever this intruder was, he was acting. He did the work. Method acting, right? When people get into the method of acting that they want to do. Clearly, we now have an intruder who is into method acting. And the intruder has got in full character of Patsy Ramsey, full character of Burke Ramsey, and full character of John Ramsey. And before the crime, they were so well thought out that they went and they knew the kind of shirt that John would be wearing that night. They knew the coat and clothes that Patsy would be wearing that night. And they knew Burke's favorite snack. And they knew that Burke liked iced tea. And they knew that Burke was going to drink iced tea at the Christmas party that night. The intruder knew all of this and replicated all of this without watching or seeing Patsy and John. And even if they did watch and see Patsy and John, they had to have a double. And then the intruder was able to replicate the fingerprints or the touch DNA of Patsy and Burke. Right. So no other coat, to the counter argument, might be necessary to think about. If we're thinking about the crime scene, then we're not looking for other coats. We're looking for the closest thing that's available in the house. And because we are looking at a number of identical items from the Ramsey household that match the critical crime scene clues, I think you might say, okay, I think this came from a polo shirt. Do we find a polo shirt in the Ramsey household? The counter argument comes up, well, yeah, there's a bunch of polo shirts in, not only in the Ramsey household, but there's a bunch of polo shirts, out in the world. And so you can't necessarily say for certain that this comes from John. And so the counter argument of the prosecution is that this evidence is circumstantial. But I think even though it's circumstantial, I will give you that. I think it's circumstantial. But I think there's something to say about the preponderance of evidence, right? Specifically, say, for example, if we're looking at Burke and we're looking at JonBenet's Barbie nightgown, if we go with the testimony of Patsy Ramsey in her interview with police and the prosecution, JonBenet she didn't wear that nightgown on Christmas Day, nor did she wear it on Christmas Eve. And when we look at the joint book, Death of Innocence, when we look at that from John and Patsy Ramsey, they discuss the idea of the Barbie nightgown and a blanket being in the washer and dryer. And so essentially, we're dealing with the fact that it's quite interesting that the blanket and the nightgown are said to be in the washer and the dryer or what have you, yet Patsy claims to not know where the nightgown was. And so one does wonder, when Patsy would have found out about the location of the nightgown, that's what I wonder. If you didn't know where the nightgown was, you couldn't find it, and the intruder removed it and placed it in the wine cellar, how would you have known that it was ever in the washer or the dryer. And we can also look at, even if this is something, and I've never heard Linda Hoffman Pugh say that it was in the washer and dryer. So I don't know if I've not seen the source of her saying that. So I cannot yet attribute that to her. Even if Linda, let's just make an example and say that Linda did say it. If Linda said it and said, oh yeah, I remember washing that 2 days ago, 2 days prior to Christmas. I remember washing that and another sheet, and they were in the washer and the dryer. If Linda says that, and then in the book, John and Patsy come and back that up and mention that, then that's important to note, because now you're giving validity. And I say that because John and Patsy, or John, never, that I know of, responded to this whole deal with Nancy Krebs and Fleet White. John never responded to it that I know of, at least not in what we have available. And in none of the interviews that I've seen have I heard John respond to this whole Nancy Krebs thing, even extensively. Because we do know in some things, like I think Vanity Fair talked about how Patsy was looking at Officer French through splayed fingers. John responded to that. That came up before John, and John responded to that because he thought that was important to respond to. That struck enough for him to respond to that. However, something like a Nancy Krebs he didn't respond to. And also so back to my point, my statement, if Linda said this, and I'm not saying she did, but if Linda said this, then John and Patsy responded to it. And I think give it a little bit of validity. And so, sort of a analogous discussion here when we think about Patsy Ramsey's red jacket and the paint tray fibers. There was a similar heated discussion occurring regarding fibers from Patsy Ramsey's red, black, and gray jacket found in the paint tray and other locations associated with JonBenét's death. Okay. And so this broader discussion around fiber evidence highlights the contentious nature of this type of evidence and the defense's consistent demand for full transparency of the lab results. So Patsy Ramsey did not recall having brown work gloves, but thought John had some. And she recalled her ski gloves were black and puffy. And Patsy was aware her paint kit was found near the wine cellar door, but denied ever painting in the basement. And she stated that she had not seen crime scene photos of the undergarments or the fiber evidence. And so when we check into the DNA finding of Patsy's saying, now Patsy took classes from from University of Boulder, Colorado. She took paint classes from there. And Patsy has painting material down in the basement, but Patsy don't paint. Please make that make sense. Why are you taking painting classes and you don't paint? Okay. Looking at some of the other DNA findings in the context, you have the foreign male DNA was found on JonBenet the night of the murder. That's what they said. This DNA was compared to the CODIS database, but there was no matches is what they found. They didn't find a match. And further testing by Bodhi Technology on the white long johns revealed the presence of a mixture that included the victim and one more male contributor consistent with the profile previously uploaded to the CODIS database, I believe, is what it's saying. So Bodhi Technology analysts stated that they saw no indication of a third party contributing to the DNA mixture found on the long johns during a specific amplification and would testify to that in court. However, the report also indicates that unknown male one, I think they call it the unknown male one profile, deduced by Denver PD, was set forth as this foreign male DNA. And so a theory was discussed that the source of the DNA on JonBenét's bloomies could be from the point of production. And so they, as you know, they went And I think they went to the production facility and tried to find, they tried to find somebody who could have been at the production facility and all such as that. And that's good police work. I'm not going to lie to you, man. That's something that I would have done. That's good police work. And, the police, they say the police bungled a lot of stuff, but that's good police work. You go and you track down the source. That shows that you have people thinking critically and thinking deeply at the very foundation, just to check out leads. And when you're talking about in a time to where, you had to travel there, you had to travel everywhere you went. Everywhere that you needed to go, you had to go. You couldn't call somebody over and then run. Of course you could. But I'm saying that a lot of these things, you couldn't do it over Zoom or something like that. People actually went, right? People actually went to stuff. You couldn't use AI or virtual transmission or drones or any of these things. You had to get up and go yourself. That means you had to jump on a plane and fly to the manufacturer and check it out. Of course, you could have called your rep over there and said, hey, we're looking for this information. Can you let us know? Of course, you could have done that. But they wanted to go and see it for themselves. And they did. And so the effect of laundering the effect of laundering this and putting these garments in the washer and dryer or what have you was also in question in terms of the DNA examination. Where does the DNA go? You know what I mean? Like if you put the long johns or what have you, or the Barbie nightgown in the washer and dryer, does the touch DNA stay? How persistent is this DNA through the washer and dryer? Angela Williamson was, I think, when you look in the forensic reports, she was a casework supervisor or casework manager. She was working with Amy JonBenet, I think her name was, who was a casework analyst for Bodie Technology. They both worked for Bodie Technology, and they were on this case with JonBenet. Amy Williamson she's a forensic scientist. She explained that the touch DNA technique where DNA can be recovered from the surface of the clothing. She explained that, and she achieved success in identifying male offender DNA from the pubic hair shafts of her victims, female victims, in SA cases, using this method of touch DNA. So she said, hey, she noted that she had an roughly 80% success rate using this technique on exterior clothing or exterior surfaces. So I guess this case, with JonBenet and trying to identify an intruder or a perpetrator, falls into that 20% that she wasn't able to recover the DNA, but she has an 80% success rate. And so kind of moving on some follow-up questions, I wanted to understand a little bit more about, okay, we know that John was wearing a black shirt. What kind of shirts did John turn over to the police? Do we know if they were cotton, or do we know if they were silk? Do we know the texture or the brand of these shirts? Does the information that we're looking at in terms of the interviews and the forensic reports, do they say anything about having that kind of shirt or that kind of fiber anywhere else in the home? Does it also do these reports also specify more about fibers and the makeup of the black shirt, or any unique characteristics of the shirt that match JonBenet's underpants? And does it say anything about where those shirts were on the night of the crime? And so kind of jumping into the first thing, right? Excuse me. John Ramsey's description of the shirt he wore on Christmas night, on, I think, the night of December 25th, John Ramsey stated that he wore a black knit sweater shirt to the White House. Patsy Ramsey, when asked about what John wore to the White House, she said she couldn't remember unless she tried to match them up. But she noted it was casual, probably khakis and something a little cleaned up. So the shirts that were turned over to police, when they requested from John and John submitted, John Ramsey's lawyers received a request from BPD for the shirt that he was wearing in photographs for Christmas at the White House. And in response, the lawyers sent 2 black shirts to the police in January of 1998. They sent 2 black shirts, right? Now, if I was, because they asked for 1 shirt, if I was a betting man, I might bet that the two shirts were sent partly due to deflection. Now, I can't say that's true, but they sent 2 shirts when they were asked for 1. Now, the counter argument might be, well, he couldn't remember which one, and so what do you expect? What do you expect him to do? And I get it. But I'm just saying, this is my opinion. It could be the case that 2 shirts were sent because there needed to be a level of deflection. But that's not the official response, so I'll leave that there. And so he sent the 2 shirts. So he sent 2. And the reason John confirmed that the 2 shirts were sent because he couldn't remember which one was the actual shirt he wore on Christmas in 1996. So they sent both. And Patsy Ramsey also noted that John sent 2 black shirts, one with a collar and one without. And she didn't remember any discussion where he tried to refresh his memory about which he wore. She also couldn't tell from a photograph which one it was, stating that he had several black shirts. Yeah, but I'm asking you which black shirt that he wore the night of the party. Now, you could definitely say, oh, I don't remember. And you could legitimately, you know what I mean, not remember. You can legitimately not remember. And I respect that. But you said that you could match them up. You could probably match them up if you saw them. And then when we showed you a picture, then you still couldn't. And that's fine. That's fine. If we show you a picture and you still can't get it, I respect that. Okay. We won't push that. So think about the type and the material of the shirt. Okay. One of the 2 shirts provided had a collar and was described as a wool shirt made in Israel. The other black shirt did not have a collar. And so when we think about the texture and the brand, then when we think about the source material, the explicit statement that the material is wool for one of the shirts, beyond like a knit sweater or a shirt in wool, you don't really have any other specific details regarding the texture or the brand of the shirt other than it's made in Israel. And these aren't mentioned in the provided text. And I wish there was some way that we could reach out to police and say, do you know the brand of the shirt? Can you look at the brand of the shirt? Because I believe the brand of the shirt is important. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And so the retrieval location, John Ramsey stated that in December of 97, when the request was made, he was living in Atlanta. And so the shirt would have been either in a box or in my closet. I need to go back and look because I think they collected a black shirt. I think police collected a black shirt from one of the search warrants or affidavits, but I'm not sure that that's the one that they used in this testing. I think when they tested John's, it was one of the ones that John gave them. And so the shirt would have been either in a box or in my closet, he said, in a box or in my closet in Atlanta. And so he didn't know if his sister-in-law, Pam, retrieved it when she took items out of the house after the murder in December of 96. And his best recollection was that it was an item packed up by movers and sent to Atlanta. Now, we also have to ask, why would Pam pick that shirt up? She came to get, and we have to start asking real questions about Pam's movement in that house. Pam was sent in there to get funeral clothes because you don't need anything else. You don't need to remove anything else from that house. because you're going back, right? I think relatively early on, BPD released the house back to the Ramseys, but the Ramseys didn't want to go back in the house. So they just stayed with friends because they had already made up their mind, I believe. They had already made up their mind that they were moving to Atlanta. They had already set themselves up to move to Atlanta. They already knew they weren't going back in that house. And so when we think about how Pam goes in and she picks up a medal from JonBenet and says, I thought you might need this. Well, we could just pack up. You on the latest Netflix documentary, Cold Case on Netflix with John Ramsey. I think on the third and final episode, they're showing pictures of JonBenet, John and his wife, I think Jan. They're showing pictures of JonBenet in her little corner with her little boots and stuff like that. And so you got all of those things. You know, eventually, why do you need this little? Why do you need this necklace now? You know what I mean? Like this, not necklace, but this little medal. Why do you need it now? You don't. Pam doesn't need to be bringing extra stuff out of the house. She's just in there. Go get a duffel bag of a suit for Burke, a suit for John, and a dress for Patsy. That's it. That's all you need to do. Getting extra stuff is not necessary because at the time, the assumption should have been that John and Patsy were going to return to the home to collect any items that they needed. So anyways, post-collection handling, John Ramsey didn't recall if he continued to wear the shirts or if they were laundered after moving to Atlanta. He typically tried to get several cycles out of a wool shirt before dry cleaning it. And he would usually hang clothes he wanted to wear again. He would hang them up, though he wasn't religious about it, and sometimes put them on a chair. And Patsy Ramsey also stated that she didn't remember what John did with his clothes on December 25th. I don't know if he hung them up or anything. Is basically her point. Noting that he sometimes put them in the laundry chute and sometimes left them in the bathroom. It's kind of different. It's kind of different because she's saying, "Oh, he just leaves them in the bathroom," and John is like, "No, I either hang them up or I put them on a chair." That's a little bit of a discrepancy, because those are two different places. And when you think about the layout of the Ramsey home or the layout of the third floor, when I think about it, they have a chair closest to their bed. They have a table set with two chairs closest to their bed. Now, and that's close to their bed, but on the other side of the room, you have their closets. And so John, there's a difference. John either lays his shirt on, I think, one of those chairs by that table that's closest to their bed, or he goes into the closet and hangs it up so he can get several cycles before he has to take it to the dry cleaner. And so right now you're telling me that we're dealing just off of that alone with what you say, because I was already thinking it. You're telling me that you're dealing with an expensive shirt, right? Because most shirts are just going to go in the wash, except for a special kind of shirt. I say that because my dad used to be religious about taking things to the dry cleaner. Certain things didn't go in the wash, and he would take them to the dry cleaner. And so based on all of that information, my opinion personally on this is to follow up on this information thus far. John is stating that he wore a wool collared shirt to Fleet White's party and that shirt was black. And when police tested to find which of the two shirts that matched JonBenet's underpants, when they tested that, the shirt that John actually wore that night of the Christmas party, those fibers were consistent with the shirt with what was found in JonBenet's underpants. And so this means that you gave us two shirts And we were able to nail down what kind of shirt it was, being a wool shirt. And we can be incredibly specific in the fact that the shirt that was used by the intruder, if it were an intruder, would have been made in Israel. So we're having to now figure out how many of those shirts were made and imported from Israel. And how many of those, you might say, if we're talking about how many of those shirts were sold in Colorado around the time, maybe like 7 years prior or what have you. We're not talking about shirts, run-of-the-mill shirts, cotton, things of that nature, made in China or Japan or Vietnam or, made in the USA. We're not talking about cotton shirts. We're talking about a specific premium fabric. Whether it was from Israel, we don't, because people can say, oh, well, we don't know if it was, Israel's not the only one who makes premium, wool shirts. Okay, sure, I'll give you that. But we are looking at somebody who is making a wool shirt that is premium fiber, premium wool. And so that import might be a little bit pricey, right? Because we're not talking, this tells us, because now let me just kind of continue to work out my thoughts. Because we're talking about an individual that might be buying a pricey shirt. And not only is the individual, think about this, not only is the individual buying a pricey shirt, but the individual is wearing a pricey shirt to the crime scene. Okay? So we're not talking about a run-of-the-mill shirt made in China, Japan, or Vietnam. We're talking about a shirt that was possibly crafted with what might be described as fine linen and fashionable threads. And so the claim by John's attorney that this could be any shirt is actually quite false. Oh, it could be any shirt in the world. No, it's going to be a specific kind of shirt. It's going to be very specific. This helps us narrow down. So the next step would be to assess and analyze how many of those shirts were imported at least 7 years prior to 96, right? Just a little prior to JonBenet's murder, and then find out where those shirts were sold and who they were sold to. And I think one of the most immediate things that we might be looking for is, are any of those shirts sold in Colorado? And specifically, obviously, Boulder, Colorado. And if so, how many of those shirts were sold in Boulder, Colorado? Of course, this does not negate the fact that somebody out of state could have purchased one of those shirts or whatever, and then come into the state and committed this crime and then fled the state. It doesn't negate that. But it does mean that we're looking for somebody very specific. We're looking for someone who had black fibers from a collared shirt and a wool shirt from Israel, or a wool that was similar to the colored wool shirt from Israel that John wore. And that's where we're trying to find, we come in trying to find the texture. And I think that it's important because this narrows it down to a very specific fiber. And that fiber is probably not going to be available. That fiber is going to be, again, we're talking about somebody that is probably a person of means to wear that kind of premium fabric to a crime scene when they know they're about to get their hands dirty, when they know they're about to, because let's think about this. Dr. Meyer said, I found fibers sort of in the beginning of this analysis. He said he found fibers sort of scattered all over. That means this shirt this wool shirt is going to be kind of messy. right? You rub up against something, those fibers are coming off. So if this is the intruder, those fibers are going to be, there's no way that this intruder was wearing gloves or what have you in other places, but he he was wearing a very, I call it a shirt that sheds a lot. I'll call it that. I'll say that a shirt that sort of drops or gives off or releases a lot of fibers, has a lot of loose fibers, right? That's the kind of shirt that we're dealing with. Is even though it's a premium fabric, it releases a lot of loose fibers. Like the fibers come off and whatnot, and that leads to the sort of degradation of the shirt over time, and whatnot. And you try to get a couple cycles, and that's why you don't want to dry clean it all the time, because you don't want to beat the shirt up. You want the shirt to stay in good condition, and you don't want to overwash it or overhandle it. Is what you don't want to do. And I understand that part. You want to keep it in good shape. We don't want to be spending money just to be spending money. But it's telling us something about the individual who would wear this premium fabric to the crime scene, and it would somehow, some way, find its way onto JonBenet. And so, kind of moving on, we think about the fibers matching JonBenet's undergarments. The claim that the investigators made will return to that, stated that their belief is based on forensic evidence, that hairs that are associated, that the source is the collared black shirt, fibers and stuff like that associated, say that it's the collared black shirt that John Ramsey sent us that are found on your daughter. And they further clarified this as the black fibers that match one of the shirts that was provided to us by the Ramseys, the black shirt. And they were located, black fibers in JonBenet's undergarments in the private area. I love this because it narrows down. Where and what you gave us. What are the odds? We're talking about a premium fabric. What are the odds that one of the two, you gave me two, it's not like you gave me 7 shirts. What are the odds that one of the 2 shirts that you gave me match the fibers in JonBenet's private area? Not only that, but what are the odds that that shirt that you gave me, the fibers come from a shirt that you wore Christmas night? Come on and talk to me. And Dr. Myers said that they were all over the place on JonBenet. Yo, hold on. I'm getting to my point. I'm on point number 3. I need to get to number 5 to make my point. Okay. So they're located on JonBenet. Okay. Scientific basis here. The prosecution maintained that the fibers were identical in all scientific respects to the fibers from the collared black shirt. However, they did have to concede that if the question was whether or not there's something unique about this, we can't say that. No, we can't say that with conclusiveness. We can't say that. No. Mr. Linwood comes in and he's like, well, you're misleading people. If people see this, you're misleading them to think that it's John. Your borderline character assassination. People will think it's John. So you can't just say stuff like that. And the specific characteristics of the shirt, sources don't really elaborate on any unique characteristics of the shirt, other than that it's it's a collared shirt. It's black. It's wool, and it's made in Israel. And the nature of the match and its limitations were sort of a point of contention between the prosecution and the defense. And locating them on JonBenet, black fibers were specifically noted as in her private area, where the unidentified male DNA was supposed to be. It's located there. My question becomes, Why would there, and I've said this before, but as we get closer and closer, as I've asked about Patsy and Burke, if you were nowhere near the crime, why would why would your touch DNA even be remotely present on the Barbie nightgown that was in the washer and the dryer? Why would it even be remotely why would it even be a possibility? And so we have to ask the same question of John. If you had nothing to do at all with the pulling up and the pulling down of the long johns, why would any kind of shirt that you have in your home, more specifically a premium wool shirt, be found all over your daughter in that area? I could understand from the chest up. I could understand that. But you said to me, you said to investigators that you did not change JonBenet. If you would have changed JonBenet the night of, right? If you would have changed her the night of, when you put her to bed, if you would have changed her into her pajamas and you were wearing that shirt, great explanation. Great explanation for sure. However, you said I had nothing to do with changing her, so there would be no reason why such a premium fabric that you wore would be found in that area. It shouldn't even be there at all. I was trying to, this is important to me because I was trying to find the average price, just a general idea of an average price of a premium wool fabric from Israel. And what I was able to find, and I didn't do a deep search, right? So don't get me on that. I didn't do a super deep search, just a simple Google asking if I'm, and I didn't say premium wool. I said, a wool sweater, maybe, from Israel. And I guess I didn't say knit. I should have said knit, but like a wool knit sweater or a wool sweater from Israel. How much would you think that would cost in the States? Because that's not run of the mill like a cotton shirt, like cotton polyester or whatever. It's not a cotton polyester mix. How much would that cost? And the prices that I saw ranged between $100, like $99.99, and $500. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That's more like it. This is a shirt, and that's why I say this is $100 shirt that we're talking about. It's like somebody might call your Sunday go to meeting clothes, your Sunday or your good clothes. I grew up hearing the term your good clothes. Oh, don't wear your good clothes. Like if you wanted to wear some school clothes or whatever, oh, those are your school clothes. You can't wear those outside. Change your clothes when you come home. Change it to your play clothes. If you, and please help me out. The intruder, you're telling me the intruder when it's been $100. Imagine Helgoth spending $100 on a shirt and going and committing a crime. Helgoth was a junkyard mechanic. No disrespect to his profession at all. I think his parents owned the place. But from what I understand, he was a mechanic and it was a junkyard. That's why I say that. I don't say that to be disrespectful. So if there was any disrespect coming through, I meant no harm. I do apologize. But let's just take junkyard out of it then. So I can be sincere. He was a mechanic, right? Helgoth ain't spent, and Helgoth is running around at night. Helgoth ain't spending no $100 on no black wool shirt, nor is he spending 500. It is my recollection that wool is pretty warm. Now, you probably would have needed a wool sweater out there in Boulder at the time, given that the wind chill and the climate was such that you probably need that. So I understand that. But you'd probably just wear a hoodie or a sweatshirt and a ski mask and some warm-ups and some gloves, and you'd be good. You're not wearing a good wool shirt to climb in and out of a small window. You're not going to be, let me make an example to make it more clear. You may have Usain Bolt or Noah Lyles. Maybe they make a lot of money and they buy this fancy gear, these fancy clothes. You probably wouldn't catch Noah Lyles or Usain Bolt. You wouldn't catch Michael Phelps or Simone Biles. You wouldn't catch Simone on a high beam doing no backflips in no wool knit shirt, her good shirt. You wouldn't catch Mike Phelps jumping in no pool in a wool shirt. You might catch Mike jumping in a pool in a cotton shirt. You know what I mean? In a polyester shirt, just to make a joke. But you won't catch him in a wool premium wool shirt. Nobody's going to wear that. My point is, nobody's going to wear that to a crime scene where they know they're about to commit a crime. It ain't going to happen. Let me move on. If we're thinking about this, and I might have to do a part 2 on this. You have this premium leather shirt, okay, that's found here. Other locations of similar fibers in the home. The materials sort of suggest there's a heavy focus on the black fibers found on JonBenet, allegedly coming from John's shirt. No specific mentions from the shirt and things of that nature. And if obviously going into discussion, like I said, we'll discuss Patsy sort of separately. Now, where were the shirts the night of the crime? John states that he wore a black knit sweater shirt to the White's house on Christmas Day. Upon returning home, he carried JonBenet upstairs around 9 p.m. or 9:15 while she was sound asleep. He then put Burke to bed around 9:30 and 9:45. We know the timeline is off. He remembers putting on pajamas and a robe after returning home for the evening. He doesn't specifically remember what he did with the clothes he wore that night. His normal routine for the clothes was he intended to wear again. He'd hang them up on the hook of the back of a door, or if dirty, put them down in the laundry chute. And we know that he probably wouldn't put him in the laundry chute. He'd probably hang him up to take him to the cleaners. Patsy also stated she didn't remember what John did, indicating sometimes he hung him up, sometimes he left him in the bathroom, sometimes put him in the laundry chute. So sort of no information specifying that particular black shirt. So my next question becomes around this idea that John is wearing this black knit sweater. He carried JonBenet upstairs to her bed. And what we're suggesting here is if this is an intruder, then we would be forced to suggest that this intruder, of course, as we've been saying, wore a wool knit shirt very similar to what we found in the Ramsey house that night of the murder. And we would have to assume that if this is John's shirt and John has nothing to do with this, those fibers would have traveled somehow from the 3rd floor when he went upstairs and hung it hung his clothes up, those fibers from that shirt would have either had to magically have traveled from upstairs to downstairs in the basement where JonBenet was found. And then the fibers would have had to magically somehow appear under the long johns. Because this is all happening when John is not present. So a shirt that John was wearing, the fabric of that shirt was found in JonBenet's clothing. And it's like we said before, this intruder came in, wore the same kind of wool shirt, premium leather wool shirt that John had to commit the crime. He also had access to Patsy's red shirt somehow to put those fibers in the paint tray. I said, this is the dumbest, smartest intruder you know. He thus far has come through the balcony of JonBenet's balcony. He has also come through the window downstairs in the basement and gone out of the window downstairs in the basement. He has written a note, the ransom note, and he has picked up Burke's on the way inside. He picked up Burke's bat from the patio or wherever it was, and he took it inside with him and down to the basement. And then, because let's also recognize this, we don't know if the bat or the golf club was used. That's the answer, right? So if you tell me that a bat was found outside of the kitchen, the butler's kitchen, then this person put the bat outside of the butler's kitchen and either decided to leave out that way or decided not to leave out that way and closed the door and went back downstairs and then decided to go up through the basement window. So somehow, some way, this individual snuck in 3 ways and snuck out 2 ways. Please help me understand. This individual also bought tea and brewed it, not using a Keurig. They brewed it the old-fashioned way. Brewed tea, made JonBenet pineapples, stunned JonBenet, and because I got a running tab of what the intruder did, and I might be forgetting stuff because I'm doing this all from memory. Stunned JonBenet with a stun gun, which is not going to put her to sleep. A stun gun is not putting people to sleep. It's waking them up. You would probably hear the zzz of a stun gun. If you can hear fish tank sounds downstairs in Burke's room from the 3rd floor, you'll probably hear a stun gun. When a stun gun discharges, you can hear the clack. It's like a clack. From my experience, stun guns are not quiet. You would have heard a clack. And when they ask you, you didn't hear nothing? No, I didn't hear anything, but yeah, I can hear the fish tank in Burke's room downstairs at nighttime. But you didn't hear the clack of a stun gun? You gotta be kidding me. This is unbelievable. So this intruder comes in through 3 ways and goes out through 2 ways. Of course, some of this can be explained away by having 2 intruders, which we know. And it can be explained away by having a male and a female intruder, one who wears a premium wool shirt, similar to John's, and one who wears a black, I think red and gray coat like Patsy's. That can definitely be explained away. And so these people who are the nicest people in the world, other than the fact that they're criminals, they are going to feed JonBenet. And they are so smart that they know everything about the Ramsey household. And they know in order to frame the Ramseys, they're going to have to go get this cover and this Barbie nightgown from the washer and dryer. And they're going to take it upstairs and they're going to get Patsy's DNA on it. And then they're going to run downstairs. Burke stayed asleep all night. They waited till Burke went back to sleep, right? So they didn't catch Burke when he was awake. They caught Burke when he was asleep so he wouldn't be aware because, Burke didn't see anything. He slept pretty deeply, right? And so they waited till Burke went to sleep, and then they went and rubbed his touch DNA all over the Barbie nightgown. And somehow, some way, urine, like fresh urine, got on the Barbie nightgown. It got on the sheets that were removed from the bed. It got on the pillowcase. Of fecal matter got on this person caused all of this, right? JonBenet did not have an accident that night that we know of, but all of these things just popped up, and they took JonBenet downstairs, and then they fed JonBenet pineapple, and then they made themselves a glass of iced tea as well. And somehow, some way, then they took that glass of iced tea and they said, "Hold on, JonBenet, before you eat, let me take this upstairs to your mom, and let me get your mom's fingerprints, not touch DNA, fingerprints. Oh, and JonBenet, you know what? You stay down here and you continue eating. I need to run upstairs. I forgot. I need to run upstairs to get your brother's fingerprints on this tea glass, and I need to get his fingerprints on this glass as if somebody was holding the glass, drinking the glass in a natural way. That's what I need to do. That's what I'm going to do." So that's what I say. And probably wore gloves, um, and just barely dropped any fibers, didn't drop any touch DNA of their own. No hair fibers, no nothing. Everything that they did an excellent job framing Patsy Ramsey and John Ramsey, and actually using everything in the house that belonged to the Ramseys. They knew. We are now talking about somebody with means and somebody that knew the Ramseys so intricately. They knew their patterns. You can't make this stuff up. They knew their patterns so intricately. They knew when they were going to come back home. They knew when they were going to leave. And they all did this very covertly, where John and Patsy had no clue what was going on. But they snuck in there and they did all this, and John and Patsy were never the wiser. They were never the wiser. And they stuck behind all of this, and they were able to frame. And like I was saying before, why would we even be discussing a bat if we don't know whether or not that bat was involved in the crime? Make it make sense. We don't know whether or not that bat was involved in the crime. When you say, "Oh, we found this bat outside of the butler's kitchen," and you say, and Burke admits and says, "Yeah, they could have come and picked up the bat on the way in," but we don't know if the bat was used in the crime. Now you're assuming that the bat was used in the crime. It could have been a flashlight, could have been a golf club. How do we know it was a bat? We're making an assumption that the intruder came in from the back, right? Because if the bat is typically in the yard or on the patio, right, back by the pond, we're making an assumption that the intruder either came in through the front and circled the house, going specifically for the bat, knowing specifically where the bat was going to be and picking it up and going inside, or the intruder came from the back of the house, from the garage area, and came around that side into the backyard, picked up the bat on the way into the house, because that was Burke's words. He could have picked it up on the way in. He and Dr. Phil, 2016, could have picked it up on the way in and snuck down the stairs, because I'm not even going to touch that because that don't make no sense. We're talking about, the intruder getting up on JonBenet's balcony, climbing up on JonBenet's balcony with a bat and sneaking in that way. These are all the things that I'm saying that because these are all the things that John and Patsy are saying about this intruder. It's like, you got to be kidding me. The intruder did all of that. That's not possible. That is not possible at all. I'm going to leave it right there. Let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe. I'll come back and continue to work on what's left of this. And until next time, take it easy.